Hello and welcome to another episode here on Captain's Dry Dock. In the Dry Dock today, I'm turning digital assets from the hugely popular retro game Command & Conquer into physical collectibles. Let's make it real. Now, if you grew up like me in the fun 90s,
You can't touch this.
play Command & Conquer, of course. You would have certainly played or knew about what is arguably considered the first real-time strategy game, Command & Conquer.
No, it's not. It was in fact this game released in 1989.
But for those that don't know, because they weren't even born then, or you're like me, you're so old, you forget why you went up the stairs in your own house to get something. This was the OG of the real-time strategy games that are being made now, such as Dawn of War and Age of Empires, amongst countless others. For those that don't know, the game was simple. You build assets such as buildings that provide troops or vehicles that help you with your mission in the game. And it's those buildings that I wanted to make. Now, like millions of others around the world, I absolutely loved the game in the 90s, and with the re-release of the remastered version in 2020, it brought back fond memories replaying it. As well as being amazed at the level of detail the developers included in the remastered version. So naturally, I really wanted to own something in physical form from the game, so I could display it on my desk, really not to play with, as the game designs were so cool. However, unlike many other popular games, such as Sonic the Hedgehog, Super Mario, and Halo, I couldn't find any merchandise for Command & Conquer in the form of in-game assets. As it seems that the original game producers, Westwood, that was then bought out by Electronic Arts, never produced much merchandise like you see from other games. However, when they released the remastered box set in 2020, it also came with physical game assets such as the Tiberium ore, a tank, and 2 of the defensive Nod towers. But that was it! I looked everywhere online to see if there was any other building assets that were produced, and surprisingly, there were none. But as this is the internet, feel free to correct me in the comments down below. And I say surprisingly, as the game was and is hugely popular. Now, there were plenty of fan-made digital 3D print files out there, such as on Thingiverse. They look cool, but they were either not accurate enough for my liking, or they were redesigned that were inspired by the game, as I assume so not to infringe on copyright and anger the owners, Electronic Arts. So it was up to me to make them for myself, and perhaps even be noticed and commissioned by a company that owns a license. First, I had to do the research. As the game had recently been remastered, I had already downloaded it from Steam to play and took loads of screenshots, as well as playing it all night long. However, I was made aware during its release a collector's art booklet of all the assets in HD and close up was also included in the physical box set, which I later found out was also available as a handy PDF file. So, after asking for help on the Command & Conquer Facebook group, someone kindly sent me the entire file. The internet can be so sweet sometimes. This was brilliant as it showed so much more detail than the screenshots, which I would definitely include in my designs. The next piece of research which really added to my in-depth knowledge of the designs was this documentary that I found on YouTube. Now, if you love the franchise, you need to watch this, as it's all about the making of the game, from interviews with the original producers and production staff, as well as the company that remastered it. I've included the link in the descriptions down below, so go check it out. This really helped explain the CNC game environment and style, as it's made to look isometric, meaning it's only ever seen from one view, unlike games such as my favourite, Sudden Strike, where you can see it from all angles. Let me explain. In Command & Conquer, the assets are 3D looking objects set on a 2D plane. And listening to the remastered designers, they mentioned a really important point, which is really interesting how they made the assets.
So you did them in 3D, but
Yeah.
like you said, the camera angle is like this weird oblique thing which distorts the distance on those original sprites. So if you looked at that from a different angle, would it look really strange?
Yes.
Yeah, true.
Yes. Sometimes he will need to manually adjust the model with different angles.
to get the right angle looks really alike to the legacy art.
This was going to be a really tricky build, so rather do what the designers did for the game, design in perspective for an isometric environment, I was going to design in isometric for a perspective environment. Sounds confusing, right? I tried different methods such as setting a view that mimicked the game's 3/4 view and even setting a profile to isometric. But I had to bear in mind throughout the entire process that making the CAD model look right on screen may not translate well as a physical model. So my solution was to flick between the two views, perspective as my working view, and then compare to how close I can get to the design when seen in isometric. The buildings I chose to make was the GDI barracks and the construction yard, and would allow me to wrap my head around getting the construction method right before making anything more complex. It's at this stage I was so thankful for the PDF reference, as I modelled the barracks as you think they're normally built, with corrugated iron, like the ones you see in World War II movies. But I was reminded of a valuable lesson during my years as an art student: never assume how you remember things or think what something looks like, but instead always refer to reference. After all, that's what it's there for. Even the internet assumed the same thing as me until I showed proof that the GDI barracks in the game are tiled and not corrugated. Now, I always planned the size to be 1/72 scale, a bit like Airfix models, like the ones you make as a kid, as it's small enough to fit in your hand and also would be a great size to show off a lot of detail. But I would later find out that this was a mistake, but I'll get back to that later. You may be wondering that if this is something I was 3D printing, which I am, why did I just make it into separate components when the 3D printer can make it in one piece?
Good question, good question.
I loved making model kits when I was a kid, as just as much as having hair, and I learned through experience that it's so much easier to paint certain parts before gluing them together, as you can avoid spending ages masking. Also, some parts may be just too hard to reach when stuck together. To 3D print, I first had to send the file to a slicing software, where I made sure that all the right supports and correct settings were there to resin print. Now, I chose the resin printer over filament printing, as filament printing leaves layer lines and would be a pain in the ass to sand down to such a small scale with so much detail. Also, the resin printer would capture all the detail that I had designed in the CAD model. The added benefit with resin prints is that they come out practically ready to paint with little or no preparation.
I love it.
Of course you do. I make you silky smooth. I tell you this.
After a number of hours printing and after a few failed attempts, I held it in my hand, but then I felt that it needed a bit more of a tactile feel in the form of weight. As I was making these as my own personal collector pieces where guests could pick them up, I wanted my creations to have a feeling of quality, which usually translates in the form of weight. Yes, I could have 3D printed these as solid, which would achieve that, but 3D print resin is super expensive. And as I had some cheap silicone sitting on a shelf, not doing anything, I decided to make a mold from the first hollowed out 3D print. Once cured, I made a cast from quick curing resin, which would be much cheaper and fast. Depending on colour, I either laid down black primer for metallic paint or white for all other colours. The paints I love to use are Games Workshop Citadel range.
That looks expensive. Is that expensive?
Yes, I know they're expensive, especially as there's plenty other cheaper and arguably better options out there, but there's a Games Workshop in practically every town, where I can physically hold a pot in my hand and check if it's the right colour. Because using on-screen photos for paint reference is never going to be accurate. After adding details with the good old-fashioned paintbrush, all the parts were super glued together. As this was going to sit on my desk or a shelf, I added another element of thoughtful quality, a soft felt base. This would avoid scratching the desk surface if any grit or grime got in between, and it also gave a tiny amount of protection to the model if slapped on the surface too hard. To make this, I exported the base outline direct from my CAD model into my vinyl cutter software and got my silhouette cutter to make a perfectly fitting felt black backing to the other side of my bases. And there we have it. They came out so well and actually very close to the isometric screenshot when photographed at the right angle.
Nice.
Okay, full disclosure. Remember I mentioned I was making these at around 1/72 scale and that was a mistake? Well, here are my first attempts. The barracks look good at this scale, but the issue was when I made the construction yard. It's huge, and if I made the entire base, it wouldn't fit on a table. So what you've just seen is my second attempt at much manageable 1/100 scale, which I say by chance matches the Warhammer Epic scale, and actually I think if I played Epic, I would certainly use these as tabletop scenery. With the models completed, I could have just left it there, but I purposely made these as if they were collector pieces, and therefore they would have to have their own presentation boxes that also would protect them. For this, I went to the Tiny Box company that make a huge range of presentation boxes, and I located boxes that were the ideal shape and size and colour for my collectibles. To go with the CNC theme, I chose black, as I love the idea of having the Command & Conquer logo on the lid in a metallic gold, which would really pop. Now, the Tiny Box company did provide a service where they can actually make a metal stamp and add a foil design to the lid, which I've done before with my Star Trek communicator badges. But this is really expensive, especially if you're only going to do one-off, and only really worthwhile if it was going into mass production. However, the Amazon digital spies must have heard me from my phone or computer, and I had targeted advertising on Amazon's webpage of a roll of gold vinyl. And having a vinyl cutter, this was a perfect solution and would look epic and in keeping with the Command & Conquer look. Just like the same process as the felt, I exported the logo to the vinyl cutting software and had the cutter do all the work, as well as making a load of extras if I cocked up or slipped. But I couldn't leave it there. Having the bottle in the box rattling around all the time was not ideal. This meant I needed to design interior padding, but unlike packaging, this would be used over and over again and again have quality added to it, a bit like the interior of an expensive camera case. Being based in the UK, for foam I always use these guys where you can have the option of types of foam and thicknesses. As each bottle was different, I ordered several thicknesses of foam to experiment with, and luckily I did, as the shape of the construction yard was really tricky. The building had a really awkward shape and required a multi-layered approach, which took a lot of trial and error and almost setting fire to my laser cutter. Yes, I know some of you may be shouting, why not have the parts separate and just snap them together with magnets? But I wanted to produce a wonderful user experience and not have to faff around. In that I want to open the box and pull out the complete game assets without having to fiddle putting things all together. The outcome was perfect. And to give it that extra special Cactus Dry Dock touch of detail, I added the logo of the game faction the building represented, which in this case was the Global Defense Initiative. So for those that own or know about laser cutting, yes, you can engrave foam. Just set it to whatever your laser cutter's engrave setting is and adjust the power so it's low or testing on a scrap piece of foam. The effect is so worth it, but be careful not to burn down your workshop like I almost did. Now again, I could have just left it there and said the entire project was completed, but I like the idea of an insert to be included with information in the box with the structure. And using the remastered art book PDF as a style guide, I designed an insert in the same style using Adobe Illustrator. And I used a screenshot of the building from the remastered game. And to give it a bit more credibility as a theme, I hunted down the Command & Conquer font. To write the content describing what the structure is on that insert, I used the up-and-coming artificial intelligence. By adding bullet points and words what I want the content to include, I requested AI to turn what I wrote into a professional description, where I then copied and pasted it into my design.
We are going to have to act if we want to live in a different world.
is a very unstable situation on the ground that is unfolding very quickly.
Move toward more ideas that will actually help bring this thing to an end.
This was a real passion project I've always wanted to do, and I even surprised myself how it turned out, considering the challenge of making something that never existed in the 3D world that was from an isometric one. Now I do plan to make every structure from the Command & Conquer game, where the next one, wait for it, will be the Hand of Nod, which you'll definitely want to watch, as I'll be using special technology and methods to recreate the iconic hand, so if you want to see that, like, subscribe and follow. In the meantime, my name's John Child, and all that needs to be said now is...
New construction options.
You take care.